welcome. Today's live stream. Today we are going to be tying one of my favorite flies to recommend to um, beginners in classic fly tying. I'm going to do the price tannet version of the Thunder and Lightning. But first, a few announcements. If you enjoy seeing what I do and want to see more of my flies, you can head on over to my Instagram. It's at justwondering.brad. And if you want to support the channel or purchase any of the flies that you see me tie, you can check out my Etsy shop. It's Studio1213 on Etsy. And all of the purchases you make there, all of that money comes back into the channel to help, improve my technology, purchase new materials, and just generally improve the channel. So today, I'm going to tie a fly. It's been a while since I've done this. I'm going to tie a fly from beginning to end, starting with a bare vise. Normally I start with a fly or a hook, and usually I've added the gut eye and the underbody, so that you don't have to sit through that. But I figure there are some people out there who haven't seen me tie an underbody, so we're going to do that now. Okay. So, and I'm going to talk through all of the materials that I'm using. I'm not going to talk too much about techniques because it's all the same techniques that I've used before. I will show some of the tips and tricks. I just want to show the pattern essentially today and show some things from the beginning. So the thread that I'm using today is white 70 denier ultra. I will also be using a similar black thread. The black 70 denier black thread that I have is actually Lagarden. But you could use black ultra if you had it. We'll talk a little bit about like why I've made these particular choices, and then a little bit about how to get started, like what skills you should have before jumping into salmon flies. And we'll actually start there, talking about some of the skills. And the list is really, really short. You should have a pretty good idea of thread control. You should have, your thread control is really important for. Let's see, where did I put my scissors? There. So thread control is the most important skill to have. And the thing about tying classic Atlantic salmon flies that I always like to say is, if you have good thread control on a size, 10, 12, 14, 16, Catskill dry fly or a Bergman wet fly, or one of those flies that looks really good tied, slim and neat. If you have good thread control on tying one of those flies, then you can tie a classic Atlantic salmon fly. It's just you're doing all the same skills. You're just doing them for longer. So, excuse me, that was not very photogenic, I realize, but I have been soaking a piece of twisted gut. I just pop it in my mouth and use saliva to soften it. I know some people don't like to do that, and they'll use like water. Like they'll just set aside a little bowl of water. I don't care, obviously. So I'm just going to give the ends a little bit of a chew, just to soften and make them a little bit more amenable to tying. Um, Part of tying on a good gut is you want the thread to really lock into the gut. Now, if I were tying this for fishing, I'd tie, of course, a full length gut. Um, so I'd tie the gut all the way to the end of the underbody. But because this fly is simply for display, it isn't going to be fished. Or at least I hope it's not going to be fished. So I've laid down a base of waxed thread, and now I'm just going to use more waxed thread to tie the eye on. Just want to make sure it's straight. If you want to straighten your eye just a little bit, you just push, or you just put your bodkin through it, and then you just give it a slight pull, and that helps straighten it out. A little bit more wax on the thread. Now, one thing I do like to do is once I have it on the fly and can see how long it's going to be, I do like to trim the ends so that they're tapered, well tapered. That just helps smooth the transition from the underbody into the head region. We're just going to bind it down. So there are two skills when it comes to thread control that are really important. One is using flat wraps. So one of the reasons why I use mono, like ultra thread or like the gel spun Vivus, is because I can lay down really flat wraps. The old time flies were not tied with flat thread, but these modern interpretations of classic flies tend to be tied for display, and we tend to say tie to different proportions than they would. A lot of the antique flies, even from like the 1950s, 1960s, they have fairly large heads. They have really kind of robust, stout bodies. We tend to tie our flies in the modern classic sense a lot slimmer. And so in order to achieve that slimmer look, we use flattened thread. Now that's made possible by synthetics such as mono and gel spun. So I'm just going to tie off the thread that I used to bind down the gut eye. And I'm going to switch to a much thicker thread. So I'm going to switch to, I think this is like 140 denier or like 200 denier. 200 denier. Vivus gel spun. Not my favorite underbody material. I think my favorite is the Unistretch. But for some reason, Unistretch has become really difficult to find. I don't know if they've gone out of business or something, but I hope not. But anyway, so I'm using Vivus gel spun. So the advent of like monofilament threads and gel spun has really allowed us to tie slimmer bodies because we can tie using flat thread. Now, when you're tying with a natural fiber thread, such as a cotton thread or a silk thread, those natural fibers don't have the strength to be just left as fibers. The natural threads derive a lot of their strength from being twisted. So like a 2-ply reverse twisted cotton thread is significantly stronger than an equivalent bundle of just cotton fibers. And the um, I'm not 100% certain on the material science, but from what I understand, it has to do with the kind of the spring-like quality of twisted fibers, um, and the resulting distribution of the load and how those interact, and I don't know. There are other factors like friction between the twisted fibers, yada yada. Like I said, not a material scientist, but I do know that natural fibers tend to be stronger when twisted. Well, that means you can't tie a fly with flat thread because you untwist it and your thread just falls apart. So, really, the modern style is made possible by modern threads. So, if you want to tie in a modern style, so the very kind of like slim and sleek modern style classic Atlantic salmon fly, you'll want to be able to, for sure, yep, okay. Yep. You'll want to be able to flatten your thread and tie with flattened thread. And then the other thing is the other skill to know uh, is using as few wraps as possible, and knowing. So I don't. I know there are a lot of people who do count their thread wraps. I am not one of those, but I also recognize when I've used too many wraps. So oftentimes, what you'll see me do is I'll put down, I'll secure a piece of material, say like a hackle, with 5 wraps of thread. But then when I go to secure something else, I'll unwrap 2 of those and then, secure the next material. And it's just knowing or getting that feel for knowing how many wraps of thread you need to secure something and how many you can undo when you go to secure the next thing or tie off, whatever. Um, and those are all, thread skills, which are really useful for tying Catskill dries, Bergman wets, any of the any classic streamer patterns, the Mary Orvis Marbury flies. Um, so I always say if you can master the Catskill dries or the Bergman wets, then you can tie classic Atlantic salmon flies. It's same skills, just you do it for a lot more for a lot longer on a per fly basis. So here you can see I'm laying down the underbody and I'm laying down just flat layers of this Vivus gel spun. Just gotta get it just right. Um, Now I'm going to do a slightly more in-depth tutorial style video for the Thunder and Lightning. I just working on getting different camera angles perfected. Uh, it's difficult tying around a camera. So if I had a camera right here, trying not to bump it or uh, you know, fiddle with it, or as I have my hands here, tying around a camera has been pretty difficult. So, but we'll figure it out. Hopefully, hopefully soon, unless I really don't like it. Also, some just fiddling with some different software editing softwares, and soundtrack, because no video these days is complete without music, and with the whole copyright thing going on YouTube with regards to things like music and such. Um, Navigating that is definitely challenging. But hopefully, soon. I'm not going to put a date on it because, like I said, first video probably a lot more work than follow-on videos, but uh, want to make sure that it is actually useful, because That's what this channel is all about, being useful. Well, except the flies. Don't fish these flies. Like I said, these flies are purely for display. If I were to tie a fishing fly, I would tie the gut eye all the way down to the bend of the hook. So anyway, so this is a floss-bodied Irish-style fly. Um, it doesn't need to be terribly chubby in the body, so I just put 3 layers of underbody on. I think that's sufficient. So we'll just tie off the gel spun. We'll restart our tying thread right at the point of the hook. So I'm using the bobbin as like a plumb bob. I'm just trying to find the point at which the thread crosses the hook point, or the point at which the hook point, or the place where the hook point would start on the hook shank. So I'm just going to start my thread there. And again, I'm wrapping flat thread wraps down towards the bend. Just going to trim my extra here. The nice thing about using 70 denier thread is compared to the size of the hook. So this is a 1/0 hook here. Compared to the size of the hook, 70 denier thread's like nothing. So it gives you a little bit of wiggle room in terms of bulk, but you do just want to avoid adding any unnecessary bulk. But again, depends on what style you're tying. If you're tying kind of a more vintage style, then thread bulk actually is useful for recreating that style. So for tinsels, I have this vintage extra fine round. Nothing special about it, just round silver tinsel. Tie on the tip and the tag. Now for the tip, I usually use 5 or 6 wraps because of how fine this tinsel is. One thing I find useful for tying a really good tapered tip and tag is if the first wrap of tinsel for the tip is on bare hook shank, and the second wrap is on the thread of the underbody. So I'm just going to wind my thread forward to get the bobbin all the way, and then again, the first wrap is on bare hook shank. Second wrap, just forward of that. Keep wrapping forward, side by side. I think that's 5. Looks good. Again, undoing a whole bunch of wraps because I know how many I used. And I want to bind down one trick for reducing the amount of bulk is to bind everything on the back side of the hook. So for me, it's the side facing the camera. I bind everything on the back side of the hook. It doesn't have to be exactly like 9 o'clock. If you're thinking of the hook as like a clock face, it's not like 9 o'clock. It's more like 8, 7:30, 8. So again, side-by-side wraps of thread. I suppose that's another important thread skill is to be able to do side-by-side wraps. But I think most people are pretty good at that. The tag is yellow silk, so I have some JEC yellow silk. You could use, Lagarton silk or rayon even. Rayon is not my favorite because it kind of has this like crinkly look to it. And it tends to be a little bit easier, or not quite as easy to smooth down. And I don't just mean like make it glassy. I mean like it kind of is fuzzy in my experience, or easily becomes fuzzy. Silk is a much easier product to make it smooth, uh, in my experience. Now I could be wearing gloves, although I've talked about this before. I don't wear silk gloves because I like to be able to feel how the silk is going on. And the other thing is you don't really need silk gloves, or I guess they're cotton gloves for tying on silk. Um, you don't really need them if your hands are clean and have been degreased. Couple of turns. Now this does have a butt, so I can trim this bit of silk short. Now, the other the other thing, if you're having trouble getting things to stick, is to wax your thread. I'm going to do so now because I'm going to tie on the tail. Now the tail is a golden pheasant crest, and it is veiled by Indian crow, at least in the at least in the price standard version. So I have a very nice golden pheasant crest here. So let me turn on another light. There you go. So yeah, it's only pretty dark out. A little bit shady. So I'm just going to give the crest a little bit of shape. So I just flattened it a little bit right here because this is where I'm going to tie it in. And to prepare the feather, all I did was took the base of the feather and I trimmed down, there we go, these fibers here just to a stubble. And I leave the stubble because the stubble helps keep the crest feather flat as I tie it in. And I just want to make sure that it's tied on center. I'm using, again, the wax thread just to bind it down. The wax thread just helps to make sure it doesn't shift around while I tie other things on top of it. Again, I'm just going to trim the end, give it one more wrap just for security's sake. Okay. Now, the tail veiling is made is a Indian Indian crow. There we go. And of course, I'm going to use my favorite substitute for Indian crow, which is red weaver. I have a few red weaver feathers here. I'm just going to use one. Um, Now on this red weaver feather, it's got a little bit of like fluff. I'm actually going to leave it because kind of in the similar way to the stubble on the crest feather, that extra kind of fluff is going to help center it on the hook. Just going to give it a wrap. The other thing that the wax thread will do is help control any of that fluff. So there we go. Let's make sure that's centered. Trim off the excess. And got a few extra fluffies there, but that's okay. All right. Next is the butt, and that is black ostrich herl. Again, this is dyed black just to make it a little bit darker. Okay. Wind it forward. I'm going to attach my hackle pliers to the tip of the herl, and then I'm just going to wrap. Now, I've said before, you want the herl to all point up. So the fibers on the herl are oriented in such a way. The herl itself is kind of T, has like a T cross section with the fibers on the top of the T, and then like the stem as the stem of the T. So when you tie in the herl, you want to make sure to tie it in so that the fibers of the herl point to the back of the hook and not forward. Because if they point forward, then they look a little bit messy. So. All right. So that's a nice looking butt. Next is the rib. So this has a single rib, which I'm going to use this Lagarton oval silver tinsel. And I'm going to tie it in again on the back side of the hook, or about 8:30, 8 o'clock. Then I'm just going to use side by side flat thread wraps, making sure to keep the the rib, the tag end of the rib on the back side of the hook. Just going to wrap my way all the way down the hook. Now, excuse me. Talking too much. Now, for the kind of beginner, you could tie in your hackle, your body hackle right there, and it does call for like a fiery brown rooster hackle. But a kind of more advanced technique is to use the silk from the body. The body is made out of black silk. To tie in the hackle as you are tying in the body. So that's a slightly more advanced technique that I use on silk bodies, so that I will demonstrate that today. But just know that if you were to tie in the body hackle now, you would tie in the hackle first at approximately the 7 o'clock position on the hook. Man. And then you would tie in the rib at the like 8 o'clock position. Then when you go to wrap the rib, you would start with the rib, and then you'd follow the hackle right behind the rib. And by tying in the hackle and the rib in that order, the rib and the hackle will fall in the right place. However, I'll show you a slightly more advanced technique here, just because it results in a nicer, I think, or what I think is a nicer presentation. So most, or a lot of descriptions of classic Atlantic salmon flies actually call for the hackle to start at the second turn of the rib. Just trim this here. I'm not actually sure why they called for that, but it was a fairly common description. So, in order to do that, I'll take the black silk. I'll just tie it down and back as if I was going to do it normally. Black silk. Now I'm going to prepare my hackle right now. So all right. So I'm just using this very nice Whiting's dry fly hackle. You can find the larger hackles near the base of the cape. These work perfect for salmon flies. I'm just going to pull off the unwanted fibers. And I'm going to select my tie-in point, which I think is going to be approximately right here. So you can see. So probably about right here. So a little bit further down the hackle. So I just want enough length, but not too much length. J hackles tend to be a little bit short, and so this has a J hackle throat. J hackles tend to be a little bit short, so I wanted to pick a slightly shorter rooster hackle. So I'm going to start wrapping the silk, and then I'll show you how I tie in the hackle. Okay. So now I've made the turnaround and I'm starting to wind my hackle back to the front. I'm going to stop uh, just about 20% or 1/5 of the way back. Maybe a little bit more. Um, but at this point, I'm going to take my hackle pliers and just put a little bit of weight there so that it doesn't unwind. Then I'm going to take my hackle. I'm going to tie it so, as you can see from this hackle, there's not. It has a shiny front side and a duller back side. Um, I'm going to take the dull back side and I'm going to place it against the body. So the dull side towards the hook shank. I'm going to use the silk from the body to tie in the hackle now. So because I have the silk hanging here, all I have to do is I just have to put the hackle. And again, I'm tying the hackle onto the back side of the hook, so I'm not creating any bulk above or below the hook. That kind of helps make the profile a little bit slimmer, even though the side to side bulk is going to be just a little bit more, just a little bit. Hackles aren't terribly bulky, but then I'm just going to keep winding the the silk forward. Just binding down the hackle as I go. Again, keeping that hackle tight to the back side of the hook. Of course, it doesn't matter once you get a few wraps down. The hackle fibers are going to go all over the place, but that's all right. But again, I'm wrapping the silk flat, just like the thread. And that just helps create a nice, smooth body. Now, at this point, I'm actually going to trim the hackle because I had so much of the hackle left. I'm actually going to trim it so that it doesn't interfere with the head, and also so I can give it a nice little bit of taper. Normally, I wouldn't have to do so much of that, but again, that was such a long hackle. Yeah, the whiting dry fly capes are really nice hackles for tying the smaller sized salmon flies. It's just getting them in the proper color can be a little bit challenging. So I'm going to take the silk right up to the front. You do need to remember to leave a little bit of space for the throat hackle, the J throat hackle, as well as this particular version has a a black herl head. So want to leave a little bit of space for that. And now I'm going to tie down the tag end of the body silk underneath the hook on the bottom. Just give it a couple of extra turns there. Next, we're going to wind the rib. So the first winding of rib happens as normal, but then the second pass of the rib has to go in front of the hackle. So I just want to pull the hackle fibers out of the way so I'm not catching any of them under the rib. And then when I go to take the first turn of rib, then the second one passes right in front of the hackle, right in front of where I tied it in, and keeps going. That way, when you go to wrap the hackle, you can wrap it immediately behind the rib without having to, fiddle with. It shouldn't cross over. So, like the hackle shouldn't need to overlap or cross over the rib in order to get to the proper orientation. Just make sure the wraps of rib are spaced out evenly. And again, I'm going to bind this down to the bottom of the hook. Okay, now I'm going to fold the hackle. And to do that, I'm going to pull the hackle away from the hook, and I'm going to just gently bring the fibers all over onto one side of the stem. Make sure you're folding the dull side to dull side and not shiny side to shiny side. Now it might not fold completely, but if you can just get like a 90 or even just a 100-degree bend in it, in the fibers, it'll sort itself out once you start wrapping. Now once you start wrapping, you want to make sure that the stem of the hackle follows precisely the back side or the trailing side of the rib. I could be using hackle pliers, but I don't need to because I left just a little bit of that fluff at the end. So again, I'm just kind of pulling the fibers back as I go, and I didn't need to fully fold this hackle in order to get it. Now, let's see. Just fold these under so they don't get caught. And again, I'm going to pull this up and bind it to the underside of the hook. So as you can see, I'm wiggling my thread back and forth. I just make sure that I don't trap too many fibers underneath it. It kind of pushes the fibers out of the way. I'm going to trim the stem, and I'm going to just take a couple of waxed thread turns just to stick everything down. And like I've said before, waxing your thread helps catch all of the kind of fuzzy bits that want to stick out. Now what I have here, now for the throat is a Eurasian jay. So this is Eurasian jay feather. Please don't use American jay feathers. Here in America, those are considered, I think, migratory songbirds, and you have to have a special permit to own them. Eurasian jay feathers, on the other hand, they are considered an absolute pest in Europe. You can buy these by the bagful. You can buy Eurasian jay wing pairs even. So use this, not American jay. American jay is essentially illegal to own outside of very specific circumstances. Now, you will notice that this I stripped away all of the non-blue barred version or side. Uh, this is actually a wrong-handed hackle. I'm actually gonna have to wrap this in the opposite direction. You only get so many of these blue feathers per J, and you get both rights and lefts. And if we only used, the right-hand feathers to wrap our hackles, we'd end up with a whole bunch of lefts. Um, Being able to wrap your hackle in the opposite direction does allow you to use more of those feathers. So it's a good trick to know. So again, it's just like a regular hackle. I'm going to pull the fibers away. I'm going to tie it in by the tip. I'm going to tie it in right next to where I tied off the throat, or the body hackle rather. I'm going to bind it down, wind my thread out of the way, and I'm going to wind the hackle. Again, counter to what I would normally wind. So most people tend to wind their hackle, up and over away from them. I'm winding it towards me because this is a left-hand hackle. I'm going to take, I want to try and get 3 or maybe even 4 turns out of this, but J hackles tend to be a little bit short and they get pretty thick in the stem pretty fast. So it's not always quite right. You could take some time and shave down the stem of the hackle. I've seen people in articles or take razor blades and they'll thin down the stems. I personally think that's it's not entirely necessary if you just practice good bulk management in general. But if you want to do that, it's an awful lot of work. So I just tie it off like normal, but again, wrapping in the opposite direction. And I want to tie it off, on the side. I'm just going to flatten that stem right where I'm going to tie it off. I need to trim the tip from tying it in. There we go. So again, I haven't added too much bulk to the top of the hook by tying everything in underneath the hook. Okay. One thing about J hackles, though, is because the stem is so thick, in order for the wing to sit properly on the fly, you're going to want to add a little bit more extra bulk to the head of the fly. So I'm just going to take a couple of passes of tying thread. And that'll just help the wing get over the hump, so to speak, of the hackle stem. I'm going to whip finish or tie off my white thread, and I'm going to switch to black thread. Switching to black thread does a couple of things. Primarily, it helps to hide any gaps you might get between tying in the wing and tying off the hackle. Like I said, I'm just using Legarten 74 denier. This just happens to be what I had. The Ultra, the 70 denier Ultra works just fine as well. Just thread my bobbin. we go. Start the black thread. It also helps just cover up the white thread underneath the head cement. So if you were, if you were inclined to just clear coat the head, then you could. I tend to use Kelson's, but that is up to you. All right, so the wing is yellow, red, and blue swan. I'm of course using dyed turkey. Bustard, which is going to be speckled bustard or Cory bustard, and golden pheasant tail. So a very simple wing. I'm not going to marry a complicated pattern today, just because I want to show, you know, kind of how easy this could be. But let me grab some Cory. So what I think I am going to do, just to add a little bit of visual interest, is to break up the Cory into a couple of different pieces. So I'm going to do 4 fibers of each thing, and I'm just going to do it in order of red, red, yellow, blue, bottom to top, and go from there. Does this be all right? Yeah, it'll be all right. So 4 fibers of red. I'll just cut out all of the slips that I need. So 4 fibers of red, 4 fibers of yellow, 4 fibers of blue, and then 4 fibers of Cory, speckled bustard. I don't need the longer side here because this is only a 1/0 hook. All right, and then I will, of course, like usual, I'll add the golden pheasant tail on top afterwards at the end. All right, so red is first. So I will take the red slip. I will take a segment of Cory. To marry them, I just put them side by side. I kind of line up the tips so they have a pleasing taper. And then all I'm doing is I'm just putting them, just kind of squishing them side by side, and then running my finger along so that they hook onto each other. Now I'm going to take, because I just only want 2 fibers of Cory, I'm going to split it up 2 and 2, 2 between the red and yellow, and 2 between the yellow and the blue. So I'm just going to take my bodkin and I'm going to remove the 2 fibers that I don't need here. And I'm going to take the yellow. And just, again, align it so that the wing has a pleasing taper. So there we go. Sometimes the tips have trouble marrying. That's okay. It'll all even out. You mostly want it to be well married through the area that's going to get compressed, like at the tie-in point, and where it's going to have to go, make the curvature for the wing. Next, we're going to take the other 2 segments of the other 2 fibers of Cory, and again, just align it so it has a pleasing taper, whatever that means to you. Now, if you're having trouble to get something to stick, you can grab it on either side of the point where it's not quite marrying, and you can just kind of jostle the fibers up and down, and that kind of helps um, the fibers kind of, well, uh, work out their differences. There we go. Now I'm going to add the blue. All right, so there's the blue. Yeah, so this has a little bit more visual appeal than I just stuck a wad of Corey in the middle somewhere. Um, but it's still pretty simple. Golden pheasant tail. As usual, and I have 2 sets of tails here. Let's see. This one for again. I want 4 fibers of this. Actually, you know what? I'm actually going to go for 5 fibers. Not that I'm splurging, but these fibers are a little bit finer than the turkey, so I want them to stand out at the top just a little bit more. So we'll just make this one fiber thicker, and it should give it a little bit more of a robust look. Okay. Just marry this right at the top. I'm going to work on the curvature just a little bit because it's not quite the same. So here, again, so that the taper tips have a pleasant angle or a pleasing angle or whatever, and then I just kind of work everything together. There we go. So that will go right here. Now you'll notice this fly doesn't have an underwing. It's one of the reasons why I chose it for beginners, because it's a great kind of fly to practice your married wings without, you know, the inconvenience or the challenge of working around an underwing. You don't need an underwing to practice your married wings for sure. All right, so we need some red. For the other side, we'll need some red. All the same colors, all the same size slips, 4 fibers each. Okay, Corey bustard. All right. So again, we'll marry together the red slip and Corey bustard slip. Now, all of these materials you can get through various sources, the best place to get Corey Bustard is through the Species Survival Program, which John McLean is the best contact for that. Go to feathersmc.com. Tell him Brad sent you. I mean, it's not going to get you anything, so, but tell him I said hi. And then for a simple donation to one of the zoos that provides feathers, you'll be entered into the program and you can receive Corey Bustard feathers. Of course, the goal of the program is to reduce the monetary value of the feathers, to reduce the financial gains from poaching the birds for their feathers. Now, they might still be poached for their meat, although I've heard they may or depending on the source, they may or may not be tasty. Who knows? But at least the feathers, which you know, can be fairly expensive, by giving them out for free, you reduce their value, and then hopefully reduce the financial pressure to poach the bustards. So you just have to make a donation to any of the zoos that are any of the participating zoos, and then you can get Corey Bustard. It's really nice. John does a really great job, and it's a really great program. It's a really great example of fly tyers being conservation minded. I think there are some other sources of feathers. I know Aaron. I believe he pronounces his last name Ostage. It sounds Scandinavian or spelled kind of Scandinavian way, although again, don't quote me on that. But AO's feathers or AO feathers is another great source for some of the like pheasants and turkey and that sort of thing. All right, so all I'm doing is I'm trimming up the butt end of the wing slips, just so that they're all kind of similar length. So, for example, on this wing, you can see how these are pretty long here. By just trimming them up a little bit, it just kind of makes the wing mounting process a little bit easier. All right, so I'm going to put these wings back to back. Just line up the tips and make sure the angle of the wingtips are similar. Here you can cheat a little bit. If the wingtip angles aren't quite the same, it doesn't matter. These are actually pretty good for me, but it's not quite essential that they line up perfectly. I want to make sure my thread is where I want it for tying in the wing, and it's right up against the throat. Now I want the wing to. Now in a modern style, the wing tip touches the tip of the tail, like so. In a kind of more vintage style, the wing might actually be tied in at an upward angle like this, or even tied longer or significantly shorter. Modern style, tip of the wing touches the tail. So once I have it in place and where I want it, I'm going to pinch the wing right behind the tying point with my non-tying hand. As usual, back in. A little bit of saliva, I'm going to, right at the point where I'm going to tie it in, just to soften up the feathers, particularly the golden pheasant. Golden pheasant tends to be a kind of a crunchy or crispy textured feather. So softening it up with just a little bit of saliva or a little bit of water works to make it less so. And I'm going to take one soft loop, so I'm going to pinch the soft loop in the hand using these fingers here. I'm going to pinch the butts, and then I'm going to let the soft loop go. I'm just going to lift the butts up here, and I'm going to lift the wing just a little bit. What that does is it causes the wing fibers to compress right at the point of the soft loop. So here, I'm going to take my fingers away gently. There you can see how the wing has compressed. Right there. All right, so I'm going to go back to pinching because otherwise I'm going to lose it. And I'm going to take one more soft loop. Again, just letting the weight of the bobbin pull the wing down. Like that. There we go. Now, I'm going to just kind of preen the wing out so that it lays well. Once I'm satisfied with the shape of the wing, I'm going to pinch here and I'm going to take a few more kind of stronger thread wraps. And I'm always going to be kind of doing this thing to keep the wing centered and on top of the hook. Okay. So there we go. That's a well set wing. So again, the key is to pinch right behind the tie-in point, to pinch right in front, and then use this motion to compress the wing fibers right at the tie-in point. Now, while I have the wing pinched like that, I'm going to trim the wing. I'm going to trim the wing in small stages. Try not to trim it all at once. And I'm just going to trim little bits until I get it roughly tapered, like so. Then I'm going to clean up my mess just a little bit. So otherwise I have little bits of feather stuck in my keyboard. I'm also going to soften my wax. Soften my tying wax. Because I'm going to wax my thread to bind down the rest of these ends here. So wax the thread. Again, whenever I'm binding down the wing or doing something around the wing until it's firmly set, I'm going to just pinch it right behind the tie-in point. And a couple of firm wraps. Trim this a little bit here. A couple of firm wraps with the wax tying thread. And then wrap all the way to the front. Just start building that tapered head. And wrap back to the tie-in point. And then I'm just going to continue working a little bit, refining the shape of the wing by preening it. I'd say that looks pretty good. All right. The final two parts are a mallard roof and a blue and red macaw horns. We're going to do the mallard roof using the tent method that I normally do. If I can find some big enough feathers or appropriate feathers. Got a lot of small lefts and big rights in this package. But I think I can actually make do with some of the smaller. So these two are pretty close in color. This one's a little bit darker. This one. It's a little too dark. All right, so these two are approximately the similar color. The portion of the feather I want to use is actually like right here, so right near the base of the feather. So if that's all the kind of webbing fluff, I want to use these fibers right there. I can usually get 2 or 3 roofs per feather that way. But using fibers further up in the feather, they can be a little bit too stiff for this method of roofing. Man, it sounds like I'm talking about like shingles or something. All right, so I'm going to cut a few slips of bronze mallard. Isn't quite right. All right. So as you can see, that's this section right there is what I want to use. Same on this feather. So I'm going to cut, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 fibers off of each. Not really counting. I want to make sure that they're approximately the same width, however. And I'm going to put them just like so. I'm going to form a little bit of a tent out of them, like so. So you can see the tent. To just kind of work them until you have the right shape. So that should follow the wing pretty well. And then I'm going to just tie them right on top. So soft loop. And then a gentle adjustment so that they're right on the top of the wing. And that's why you want to use really soft bronze mallard, because it needs to follow the curve of this wing here. If you were to use like the fibers from like the tip, like out here, these are too stiff. So the kind of funny thing about bronze mallard is the deeper the bronze color, the less suitable they are for bronze mallard roofs. Just because that bronze portion is just it's a little bit like golden pheasant, where it's a little bit kind of that stiffer, crunchier feel. So it doesn't quite bend around the curve of the hook or curve of the wing quite as well. Okay, next. Blue and gold macaw horns. And I, of course, as usual, will tie on the far side one first. Come on. And that's just because if I tie on the far side one first, you can actually see and match or work to match the angle a little bit better on the near side one. It's a little bit easier to manipulate the near side one. So there's one. And the angle at which you tie on your horns is really up to you, and what your taste is, and how long you tie your horns is up to you, and what your taste is. I like my horns to have a kind of a sharper up angle, and project beyond the bronze mallard roof. So I'm going to wax my thread a little bit. And I'm going to take a few more turns, and then I'm going to trim everything down. And bind everything down using the waxed thread. And I'm going to take it back to the tie-in point. Actually, I'm going to wax my thread some more. I'm going to take it back to the tie-in point, and we're going to tie in the herl for the herl head. The extra wax on the thread just helps keep the herl from slipping down thread, or the head towards the eye. And like I said, the herl has a T-shaped cross section, so I want to make sure when I tie it in, the way I tie it in is the T. I tie the herl on the side of the hook with the T facing up. And that just ensures that the herl, the fibers on the herl are to the back of the stem, and they don't get trapped underneath the stem. So again, attach my favorite articulated hackle pliers to wrap my herl head. Should get about 3 wraps here, maybe 4 if I'm lucky. Now I'm just using, now because I had laid down waxed thread underneath the herl head, I'm just using the heat from my fingers to kind of melt the wax and help stick the herl to the head, so again it doesn't slide down the hook. Just pulling the herl back so I don't trap it under the thread. A couple of wraps of thread to tie down the herl. I'm going to trim it. Wax. And then I'm going to whip. And trim. Right. Just going to. We got a little topsy-turvy there, so let me just quickly fix the roof. we go. Yeah, the horns on the roof just got a little bit tangled up there. But there we go. That is focus. That's the price tannet. Thunder and Lightning Irish. Salmon fly, great fly for beginners. It's super simple, super easy, and as you can see, it looks very attractive, even though it's quite simple. It's a great way to learn a lot of techniques, including, thread control, laying out an underbody, the various parts of the fly, marrying wings, adding a bronze mallard roof, horns, herl head, herl butt, the whole 9 yards, even though this is a really simple fly. This has the same number of parts essentially as some of the Bergman wet flies. It's a little bit bigger and a little bit more. So thanks for tuning in. Like I said at the beginning, if you enjoy what I do, if you want to see more of my flies, check out my Instagram. It's at justwondering.brad. If you want to help out with the channel, support the channel, or purchase any of the flies you see me tie, my Etsy shop is Studio1213. I appreciate all the views and all the people hanging out with me. And I will see you in the next one. Next week, the stream will not be on Saturday. I think it'll be on Sunday. I'm not sure. I'll try to announce it on my Instagram. But I am going to be at an all-day COVID-19 testing event with my local health department. I'm a medical reserve corps volunteer. So I'll be working that on Saturday. So we won't have a stream on Saturday. It might be Sunday. But keep an eye out for an announcement. So, yeah, thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all next week. Bye.